I never thought my quiet retirement in Odessa, Texas would turn into a legal battlefield, but that's exactly what happened when the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association decided they owned what was beneath my feet. My name is Zachary Henderson, and I bought my modest 3-bedroom ranch house in the Pine Ridge subdivision back in 2019. I'd spent 30 years working as a petroleum engineer for various oil companies across Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico before finally settling down. The house was perfect for me. Single, no kids, just wanted some peace and quiet to enjoy my golden years. The neighborhood seemed nice enough when I moved in. Typical West Texas suburb with cookie-cutter houses painted in various shades of beige and tan, manicured lawns that people fought to keep green despite the desert climate, and an HOA that I initially thought would just handle the community pool and maybe organize a Christmas lights contest. I was wrong about that last part. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning in March 2025. I was sitting on my back porch, drinking coffee and reading the news on my tablet, when I heard the unmistakable sound of heels clicking up my driveway. I looked up to see Patricia Whitmore, the HOA president, marching toward my front door with a manila folder clutched in her perfectly manicured hands. Patricia was everything you'd expect from an HOA tyrant, mid-50s, bleached blonde hair teased into an immovable helmet, always wearing business casual outfits, like she was heading to a corporate meeting instead of harassing neighbors about their mailbox colors. I set down my coffee and walked around to meet her before she could start pounding on my door. "Morning, Patricia. What can I do for you?" She turned toward me, her lips pursed in that expression of perpetual disapproval she seemed to wear like a badge of honor. "Mr. Henderson, we need to discuss a serious matter. May I come in?" "I'd rather talk out here if it's all the same to you. Beautiful morning." I gestured to my patio furniture, but she remained standing. "Very well." She opened the manila folder and pulled out a thick stack of papers. "The Pine Ridge HOA board has been reviewing our community documents, and we've discovered that your property deed contains an error." I felt my stomach tighten. What kind of error? "According to our master deed, filed when this subdivision was developed in 2015, all mineral rights beneath Pine Ridge properties belong to the HOA collectively. However, your individual deed appears to show that you retained mineral rights when you purchased the property. This is obviously a mistake that needs to be corrected." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "Patricia, I bought this house through a standard real estate transaction. My deed is what it is. I own the land and the mineral rights beneath it. That's where you're mistaken." Her voice took on a condescending tone, like she was explaining something simple to a child. "The seller had no right to convey those mineral rights to you because they belong to the HOA. We're giving you the courtesy of informing you that we'll be filing a corrective deed and a quiet title action to clarify the ownership." "You can't just take my property rights because you feel like it," I said, keeping my voice level despite the anger building in my chest. "I have a valid deed recorded with Ector County. What you're talking about is theft." Patricia's expression hardened. "Mr. Henderson, I suggest you review your HOA, covenants, conditions, and restrictions. You agreed to them when you purchased this property. The mineral rights issue will be resolved one way or another. I'm simply trying to handle this professionally before it becomes contentious. We'll be filing the paperwork with the county this week. Have a nice day." She turned on her heel and walked away, leaving me standing there holding the papers she'd thrust into my hands. I went back inside and immediately started reading through everything. The HOA's position was based on a clause in the master deed that stated all mineral rights would be held collectively by the Homeowners Association for the benefit of the community. However, my individual deed, which I pulled out of my filing cabinet, clearly stated that I was purchasing the property together with all mineral rights, oil, gas, and other substances of value beneath the surface. I'd worked in the oil industry long enough to know that mineral rights were serious business. In Texas, surface rights and mineral rights can be separated, sold individually, and owned by different parties. It's called a split estate. The general rule is that whoever owns the mineral rights has the dominant estate, meaning they have the right to access and extract those minerals even if someone else owns the surface. I also knew that in any conflict between deeds, the specific deed usually takes precedence over general declarations, and more recent deeds typically override older ones. But I wasn't a lawyer, so I did what any sensible person would do. I called one. The next morning, I met with Marcus Chen, a real estate attorney with an office in downtown Odessa. His receptionist led me to a conference room where Marcus, a sharp-eyed man in his early 40s, was already reviewing the documents I'd emailed him the night before. "Mr. Henderson, please sit down." He gestured to a chair across from him. "I've looked over what you sent me, and I have to say, this is an interesting case." "Interesting good or interesting bad?" I asked. "Interesting as in the HOA doesn't have much of a leg to stand on, but they're going to make your life difficult anyway." He pulled up something on his laptop and turned the screen so I could see it. I pulled the master deed for Pine Ridge subdivision. Yes, it does contain language about mineral rights being held by the HOA. However, that language is essentially meaningless if the original developer didn't actually own the mineral rights to convey them. "What do you mean?" I did some digging in the county records. The land that became Pine Ridge was originally part of a larger ranch owned by the Hartley family. In 2014, the Hartleys sold the surface rights to Lone Star Development Company, but they retained the mineral rights. Lone Star Development then created the subdivision and started selling lots. However, they could only sell what they owned, which was the surface rights. I leaned forward. "So the HOA's master deed claiming mineral rights is worthless because Lone Star Development never had mineral rights to give them?" "Exactly. It's like me trying to sell you the Brooklyn Bridge. I can write up a nice contract, but I don't own the Brooklyn Bridge, so the contract means nothing." Marcus smiled. "It gets better. In 2018, the Hartley family sold their mineral rights to a company called Permian Minerals LLC. Then, in 2019, Permian Minerals went bankrupt, and their assets, including the mineral rights under Pine Ridge, were auctioned off. According to the bankruptcy court records, a man named Frank Sullivan bought those rights." "Okay, so Frank Sullivan owned the mineral rights when I bought my house?" "That's where it gets interesting. Frank Sullivan was the seller of your property. He bought your lot from the original purchaser in 2017, and when he sold it to you in 2019, he conveyed both the surface and mineral rights because he owned both at that time. Your deed is perfectly valid." Relief washed over me. "So what do I do about the HOA's threat to file a quiet title action?" Marcus closed his laptop. "They can file whatever they want, but they'll lose. The problem is that litigation is expensive and time-consuming. Even though you're in the right, you'll have to pay legal fees to defend yourself. I can handle this for you, but I want to be upfront about costs. If this goes to trial, you could be looking at $20,000 to $30,000 in legal fees." I winced. That's a lot of money to defend something I already own. "Unfortunately, yes. The alternative is to let them file their action and then respond aggressively. Sometimes when HOAs realize they're going to face a real legal battle, they back down, especially if we can show them the evidence up front that they have no case." "Let's try that approach first." I said, "Can you draft a response laying out everything you just told me?" "Absolutely. I'll get something to you for review by the end of the week." I left Marcus's office feeling better, but also annoyed that I was going to have to spend money on this nonsense. Patricia and her board of busybodies had no idea what they were talking about, but they were going to cost me time and money anyway. Over the next few weeks, things escalated. True to her word, Patricia filed a quiet title action with the county court. Marcus responded with a detailed motion to dismiss, complete with all the evidence showing the chain of title for the mineral rights. We also sent a letter to every member of the HOA board explaining why their position was legally baseless and warning them that they could be held personally liable for pursuing frivolous litigation. That last part seemed to rattle some of them. I started getting calls from neighbors I barely knew, asking me what was going on. Turned out Patricia hadn't actually told the full board what she was doing. She'd convinced two of her friends, Susan Clark and Deborah Martinez, to vote in favor of filing the lawsuit, but the other board members had been kept in the dark about the details. One evening, my neighbor Tom Randall came over. Tom was a retired school teacher, soft-spoken and generally reasonable. He was also on the HOA board. "Zach, I need to apologize," he said when I opened the door. "I had no idea Patricia was going after your mineral rights until I got that letter from your attorney. She told us it was just a paperwork correction to fix a title error." "Come on in, Tom." I led him to the living room. "Want a beer?" I'd love one. I grabbed 2 bottles from the fridge and sat down across from him. What's really going on here? Why does the HOA even care about mineral rights? Tom sighed and took a long drink. About 6 months ago, Patricia got it in her head that the HOA should be generating revenue beyond just our dues. She started talking about monetizing community assets. Most of us thought she meant renting out the clubhouse for events or maybe putting in some solar panels. Then she brought in this guy, Dale Kruger, who claimed to be an energy consultant. He told her that the land under Pine Ridge might have oil and gas deposits worth millions. Dale Kruger, I sat up straighter. Tall guy, slicked back hair, drives a white Cadillac. Yeah, you know him? I know of him. He's a lease broker, bottom feeder type. 10 years ago, he tried to scam a bunch of landowners out in Loving County by offering them pennies on the dollar for their mineral rights leases. The guy's a con artist. Tom looked troubled. That explains a lot. Patricia's been in constant contact with him. She mentioned something about him having buyers lined up who would pay the HOA a huge signing bonus if we could clear up the title issues and lease out the mineral rights under the subdivision. Let me guess. Kruger probably told her he'd take a percentage of whatever deal he brokered? She didn't say that explicitly, but yeah, I got that impression. Tom, the only title issue here is that the HOA doesn't own any mineral rights to lease. Patricia is being played by Kruger, and she's trying to steal my property to make it happen. Tom rubbed his face. This is a disaster. What can I do? Talk to the other board members. Let them know what's really happening. If the board votes to drop this lawsuit, it goes away. I'll try, but Patricia has a way of steamrolling people. Susan and Deborah will back her no matter what. After Tom left, I sat in my living room thinking. Dale Kruger's involvement changed things. This wasn't just Patricia being an overzealous HOA president. Someone had convinced her there was money to be made, and she was willing to run roughshod over property rights to get it. The ironic thing was, Kruger and Patricia might actually be right about there being oil under Pine Ridge. The Permian Basin is one of the most productive oil and gas regions in the world. Odessa and Midland have been boom towns for decades because of petroleum. Horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing had made it possible to extract oil from formations that weren't economically viable before. It wasn't crazy to think there might be valuable deposits under the subdivision. Which got me thinking. The next morning, I made some calls to former colleagues. I still had friends in the industry, geologists and landmen who knew the Permian Basin like the back of their hands. I described the location of Pine Ridge and asked what they knew about the geology beneath it. My buddy Raymond Park, who worked for a mid-sized exploration company, called me back that afternoon. Zach, funny you should ask about that area. We've been looking at data for that whole section. The Wolfcamp Shale Formation runs right through there, probably about 7,000 feet down. Based on the wells that have been drilled nearby, I'd say there's a good chance of commercial production. Good enough to justify drilling an exploratory well? Potentially, yeah, but it would be expensive. You're looking at $3 to $5 million to drill and complete a horizontal well. That's not something you do on a whim. You'd need to be pretty confident in the geology and have a decent amount of acreage locked up to make the economics work. What if someone just wanted to drill on a single residential lot? Is that even possible? Raymond laughed. Technically possible, sure. But practically speaking, no oil company is going to drill on a single lot in the middle of a subdivision. You need surface access, room for equipment, storage for water and chemicals. Plus, modern horizontal wells can extend for miles underground. You drill vertically down through your lot, then turn horizontal and drill under other properties, but the surface location needs to be somewhere appropriate. So even though I own the mineral rights under my property, I'd need to coordinate with other mineral rights owners to make a well worthwhile? Exactly. That's why people usually lease their mineral rights to oil companies rather than trying to drill themselves. The oil company aggregates leases from multiple owners, then drills wells that can tap the entire area. What about spacing requirements? Could someone drill on land surrounded by a residential subdivision? That's where it gets tricky. The Texas Railroad Commission regulates oil and gas drilling. They have setback requirements from occupied structures, usually at least 200 feet for horizontal wells. In a dense subdivision, you might not be able to meet those requirements. You'd have to look at the specific situation. After talking to Raymond, I pulled up the Railroad Commission's website and started researching. Texas has a long history of oil and gas development, including wells drilled in urban areas. There were famous examples like the East Texas field, where derricks once stood in people's front yards. Modern regulations were stricter, but it was still possible to drill in developed areas if you met the requirements. I spent the next few days studying the regulations, looking at aerial photos of Pine Ridge, and making calculations. The subdivision covered about 40 acres. My lot was on the western edge, backing up to an undeveloped field that was owned by a rancher. If I could get permission to use part of that field for a well pad, I might be able to drill while meeting the setback requirements. It was a crazy idea, but the more I thought about it, the more it appealed to me. Patricia wanted to steal my mineral rights to make a profit? Fine. I'd beat her to the punch and drill my own well. I called Raymond back. If I wanted to explore drilling on my property, how would I go about it? I'm not looking to start an oil company, but I want to understand my options. Zach, are you serious? Drilling a well is a massive undertaking. I'm just exploring the possibility. Humor me. Raymond sighed. Okay, well, first you'd need to conduct geological and geophysical surveys to confirm there's producible oil. Then you'd need to get permits from the Railroad Commission. Then you'd need to contract with a drilling company, a completion company, and eventually a pipeline company or trucking company to transport the oil. You'd also need to secure water sources for the fracking process and disposal wells for the wastewater. And you'd need several $1,000,000. What if I partnered with an existing operator? Could I lease my mineral rights but retain some kind of working interest? Yeah, that's possible. Instead of just getting a royalty, you could negotiate to be a working interest partner. You'd share in the costs, but also get a bigger percentage of the revenue. Some landowners do that if they're confident in the potential and have the capital to invest. Interesting. Thanks, Raymond. Zach, seriously, what are you planning? I'm not sure yet, but if it happens, you'll be the first to know. Meanwhile, the legal battle with the HOA continued. Patricia refused to back down despite the evidence Marcus had presented. In fact, she doubled down, hiring her own attorney, a guy named Bradford Pierce, who had a reputation for being aggressive and expensive. Pierce filed an amended complaint with additional claims, including allegations that I had somehow fraudulently obtained the mineral rights and that my deed should be voided. It was absurd, and Marcus assured me that the new claims were just as baseless as the original ones, but it meant more legal wrangling and more billable hours. By early April, I had already spent $15,000 on legal fees, and we hadn't even gotten to depositions yet. The stress was getting to me. I'd retired to enjoy peace and quiet, not to fight with my HOA and spend my savings on lawyers. One night, I was sitting in my backyard looking up at the stars and trying to remember why I'd moved to this stupid subdivision in the first place. That's when my phone rang. It was an unknown number with a local area code. Hello? Is this Zachary Henderson? The voice was male, deep, with a hint of a West Texas drawl. Yeah, who's this? My name's Cole Brixton. I'm a landman with Apex Energy Partners. I was hoping I could talk to you about your property in the Pine Ridge subdivision. I sat up straighter. What about it? Well, sir, we've been acquiring mineral rights in that area for a drilling project. We've got most of the section locked up, but we're missing a few parcels, including yours. I'd like to meet with you to discuss a lease agreement. How did you get my name and number? County records show you as the owner of the surface and mineral rights at your address. It's public information. Is this a bad time? I can call back? No, it's fine. Tell me more about what you're proposing. Cole explained that Apex Energy was planning to drill multiple horizontal wells in the section that included Pine Ridge. They were offering a 3-year lease with a signing bonus of $3,000 per net mineral acre, plus a 20% royalty on any production. According to my deed, my lot was about half an acre, so I'd be looking at a $1,500 bonus and a continuing royalty if they struck oil. That's an interesting offer, I said carefully. But I'm going to need some time to think about it. Can you send me the details in writing? Of course. I'll email you our standard lease agreement tonight. Take a look and let me know if you have questions. We're hoping to start drilling in the next few months, so we'd like to get everything tied up soon. And after he hung up, I sat there processing. Apex Energy was a legitimate company. I'd heard of them. The offer was probably fair based on current market rates. If I signed, I'd get a modest signing bonus and a royalty if they produced oil. It was the safe, sensible option. But something bothered me about the timing. How did Apex Energy suddenly know I owned mineral rights? The county records had been public all along, but no one had approached me in the 6 years I'd lived here. Then, within a month of Patricia filing her lawsuit, a landman calls me out of the blue. I went inside and searched for Apex Energy Partners online. Their website showed they were a privately held exploration and production company based in Midland, Texas. They had a portfolio of projects across the Permian Basin. The leadership team included several names I recognized from the industry, serious professionals. I clicked through to their news section and found a press release from 3 weeks earlier announcing that Apex had acquired a large acreage position in Ector County and planned to drill 6 horizontal wells in the coming months. One of the quoted executives was Dale Kruger, described as a consulting advisor to Apex. And there it was. Dale Kruger was connected to Apex Energy. He'd convinced Patricia to go after my mineral rights so that Apex could lease them. When I'd refused to cooperate, Apex had their landman reach out directly with an offer. I called Marcus Chen first thing the next morning and explained what had happened. "That's concerning," Marcus said. "It suggests there might be coordination between the HOA and Apex Energy. If we can prove that Patricia is getting some kind of kickback or benefit from Apex, we might have grounds for a counterclaim." "What kind of counterclaim?" "Fraud, conspiracy, breach of fiduciary duty. As HOA president, Patricia owes a duty to act in the best interests of the homeowners, not to line her own pockets. If she's trying to steal your mineral rights to benefit herself in Apex, that's a serious violation." "How do we prove it?" "We'd need to conduct discovery, subpoena documents, take depositions. It would add to the cost, but if we win, we could potentially recover attorney's fees and even punitive damages." I thought about it. Fighting would be expensive, but I was already in deep. And the idea of letting Patricia and Kruger get away with their scheme made my blood boil. "Let's do it," I said. "File the counterclaim." Over the next few weeks, Marcus went to work. He filed a detailed counterclaim alleging that Patricia, Dale Kruger, and Apex Energy had conspired to deprive me of my property rights through fraudulent legal action. We subpoenaed communications between Patricia and Kruger, as well as any agreements between Kruger and Apex. The response was swift and furious. Bradford Pierce, Patricia's attorney, filed a motion calling our counterclaim frivolous and asking for sanctions. Apex Energy's legal team sent a letter threatening to sue us for defamation if we didn't withdraw our allegations. "That's actually a good sign," Marcus told me during one of our weekly calls. "If they weren't worried, they wouldn't be threatening us. Let's keep pushing." In early May, we got our first break. Tom Randall called me, his voice urgent. "Zach, I need to meet with you, tonight if possible. Can I come over?" "Of course. Is everything okay?" "Just let me come over. I'll explain in person." An hour later, Tom was sitting in my living room, looking nervous. He pulled a flash drive from his pocket and set it on the coffee table. "What's this?" I asked. "Evidence? I feel sick about this whole situation, so I've been doing some digging. Patricia keeps all the HOA records on her personal computer. Last week there was a board meeting at her house, and I offered to stay late to help her organize some files. While she was in the kitchen making coffee, I copied a bunch of documents onto this drive." "Tom, that's risky. If she finds out, I know, but I couldn't just stand by while she does this to you. Zach, it's worse than we thought. There are emails between Patricia and Dale Kruger going back almost a year. Kruger promised her $100,000 if she could deliver mineral rights leases for the entire subdivision. She's been systematically targeting homeowners, telling them they don't own mineral rights and need to sign them over to the HOA. My jaw dropped. She's trying to scam the entire neighborhood? Looks like it. Most people just believed her and signed documents without getting lawyers involved. You're the first person who fought back. But here's the thing. The documents people sign don't actually transfer anything because the HOA doesn't own the mineral rights in the first place. It's all fake." I picked up the flash drive. "Can I give this to my attorney?" "That's why I'm here. I know I probably broke some laws copying this stuff, but I don't care anymore. Patricia has to be stopped." The next morning, I met with Marcus and gave him the flash drive. He spent the afternoon reviewing the files, and when he called me that evening, he sounded excited. "Zach, this is a gold mine, pardon the pun. We've got emails showing clear coordination between Patricia and Kruger. We've got evidence that she knowingly made false representations to homeowners. We've even got financial projections showing how much money she expected to make. This is fraud, plain and simple. What do we do with it? First, I'm going to file a motion to compel in the lawsuit, demanding that Patricia produce these exact documents through discovery. When she says she doesn't have them or claims attorney-client privilege, we'll know she's lying. Then we spring the evidence. I'm also going to recommend you file a complaint with the district attorney's office. This might be criminal." Criminal? Really? What Patricia is doing could be prosecuted as theft by deception or fraud. The DA might not take the case, but it's worth reporting. Things moved quickly after that. Marcus filed his motion, and just as he predicted, Patricia's attorney claimed the requested documents didn't exist or were privileged. Marcus then filed the actual emails and documents, catching them in a lie. Bradford Pierce withdrew from the case almost immediately, probably not wanting to be associated with a client who was caught red-handed. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted to remove Patricia as president. Susan Clark and Deborah Martinez, her two allies, were also forced to resign. Tom Randall was appointed interim president, and one of his first acts was to dismiss the lawsuit against me. But I wasn't done. I filed a complaint with the Ector County District Attorney's Office, submitting all the evidence of Patricia's scheme. I also filed a civil lawsuit against Patricia, Dale Kruger, and Apex Energy for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted theft. While all this legal drama was playing out, I'd been quietly moving forward with my own plans. I contacted Raymond Park and asked if his company might be interested in partnering on a well. I offered to contribute my mineral rights and secure a surface location in exchange for a working interest. Raymond was skeptical at first, but after reviewing the geology and the potential, he brought the idea to his bosses. In late May, I signed an agreement with Raymond's company, Crescent Resources. I would contribute my mineral rights, plus obtain leases from the adjacent property owner for surface access. In exchange, I'd get a 25% working interest in any wells drilled. Crescent would handle all the operations and initial financing, but I'd be responsible for my share of the ongoing costs. It was a big financial commitment. My share of drilling costs would be over $1 million. But I'd worked in this industry my entire career. I'd saved diligently, invested well, and I had confidence in the Permian Basin. Plus, after everything Patricia had put me through, I wanted to prove a point. With Crescent Resources backing the project, things moved fast. They conducted seismic surveys, analyzed well logs from nearby wells, and designed a drilling program. By mid-June, we had our permits approved by the Texas Railroad Commission. The well would be drilled on the field adjacent to my property, meeting all setback requirements. We'd drill vertically down to about 7,000 feet, then turn horizontal and drill under Pine Ridge for about 2 miles, tapping the Wolfcamp Shale. If successful, the well would produce oil from beneath my property and many of my neighbors' properties. The irony wasn't lost on me. Patricia had tried to steal everyone's mineral rights to lease them to an oil company. Now I was drilling under those same properties, and because I'd worked with a legitimate operator who followed the law, there was nothing she could do about it. Drilling began in early July. I drove out to the well site almost every day, watching the crews work. There's something mesmerizing about a drilling rig, the way the massive machinery operates 24 hours a day, slowly pushing deeper into the earth. The noise, the smell of diesel fuel and drilling mud, the organized chaos of roughnecks doing dangerous work, it all brought back memories of my younger days in the field. Raymond kept me updated on progress. They hit the target formation right where the geology predicted. The rock samples looked promising, with good oil saturation. By late July, they'd finished drilling the horizontal section and started the hydraulic fracturing process, pumping millions of gallons of water, sand, and chemicals underground to crack the shale and release the oil. Then came the moment of truth. On August 3rd, they brought the well online and started flowing it back. For the first few days, it produced mostly water and gas as the fractures cleaned out. But on August 5th, oil started coming up. Raymond called me at 6 in the morning. "Zach, we're producing 300 barrels of oil per day and climbing. Based on the early flow rates and pressure data, this is going to be a very good well." I drove out to the site and watched black crude flowing through the separator into storage tanks. After all the stress, all the legal battles, all the uncertainty, I'd struck oil. Over the next few weeks, the well's production stabilized at around 500 barrels per day. At current oil prices of about $75 per barrel, that meant gross revenue of over $37,000 per day. My 25% working interest, after paying for operating costs and pipeline fees, would net me somewhere around $7,000 per day. $7,000 per day from oil flowing beneath the property Patricia had tried to steal from me. The well would decline over time, of course. Oil wells don't maintain peak production forever. But even with a typical decline curve, this single well would produce millions of dollars over its lifetime. And Crescent Resources was already planning to drill 2 more wells on the same pad. Word spread quickly through Pine Ridge. Neighbors started asking me questions about mineral rights and whether there was oil under their properties too. I explained the situation honestly. Yes, there was likely oil under most of the subdivision. Yes, the well I'd drilled was producing from beneath multiple properties. No, they wouldn't see any direct revenue from this well because I owned the mineral rights beneath the wellbore path. Some people were upset about that, feeling like they'd missed out on something. I reminded them that they could lease their mineral rights to other companies or even band together as a group to negotiate better terms. A few took my advice and ended up signing profitable leases with other operators. But the person who was most upset was Patricia. In early September, I was served with a lawsuit from her. She alleged that I'd stolen her idea to drill for oil, that I'd used confidential information from the HOA lawsuit to unfairly profit, and that I owed her a share of my revenue. It was preposterous, and Marcus moved to dismiss it immediately. "This is a desperate attempt to get money from you," Marcus explained. "She knows she's in trouble with the criminal investigation, and she's hoping you'll settle just to make her go away." "That's not happening," I said firmly. Marcus smiled. "I didn't think so. Let's countersue her for abuse of process and demand attorney's fees." While Patricia's frivolous lawsuit was being dismissed, the criminal investigation was bearing fruit. In October, the Ector County District Attorney announced that Patricia Whitmore and Dale Kruger had been indicted on multiple counts of fraud and theft. Apex Energy wasn't charged criminally, but they settled a civil lawsuit with several Pine Ridge homeowners, paying out $200,000 and agreeing to reform their practices. Patricia's trial was scheduled for March 2026, but she ended up taking a plea deal in February. She pleaded guilty to felony fraud and was sentenced to 3 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months. She was also ordered to pay restitution to the homeowner she'd scammed. Dale Kruger went to trial and was convicted. The jury didn't buy his defense that he'd simply been offering business advice. He got 5 years in state prison. By the time the legal dust settled, it was spring of 2026. I'd spent nearly $100,000 on legal fees, but I'd won every single case. The HOA formally apologized to me and amended its governing documents to clarify that mineral rights were not part of the common property. More importantly, my wells were producing. Crescent Resources had drilled 2 additional wells, and my daily revenue was averaging around $20,000. After paying my share of operating costs and setting aside money for future drilling expenses, I was clearing about $15,000 per day. In 1 year, I'd gone from a retired petroleum engineer living on a pension to a millionaire oil producer. I didn't let the money change me. I kept living in my modest house in Pine Ridge. I upgraded a few things, bought a new truck, took a nice vacation to Alaska. But mostly, I invested the profits back into more drilling projects with Crescent Resources and donated money to local charities. The HOA, under Tom Randall's leadership, became a model of transparency and proper governance. Tom served as president for 2 years before stepping down, and the new board was careful to never overstep their authority again. I stayed in touch with many of my neighbors, and the relationship improved dramatically once Patricia was gone. People realized I hadn't done anything wrong. I'd simply defended my property rights and gotten lucky with timing. Though luck wasn't really the right word. I'd spent 30 years learning the oil business. I'd studied the geology, understood the economics, and had the courage to invest when the opportunity arose. Patricia had tried to steal from me, and instead, she'd motivated me to pursue something I might never have attempted otherwise. On a warm evening in late May 2026, almost exactly a year after the first well started producing, I was sitting on my back porch with a cold beer, watching the sun set over West Texas. My phone buzzed with a notification from my banking app showing the day's oil revenue deposit. $22,000, a particularly good day. I thought about Patricia sitting in a cell somewhere, probably bitter and angry about how things had turned out. I thought about Dale Kruger, the con artist who'd finally gotten caught, and I thought about all the honest people in Pine Ridge who were now better informed about their rights and more skeptical of authority figures who claimed to have their best interests at heart. The oil industry had given me a good living for decades, and now it had given me something more: vindication, security, and the satisfaction of knowing I'd stood up for what was right. I raised my beer bottle toward the setting sun, toward the drilling rigs visible on the horizon, toward the future that flowed from deep beneath Texas soil. To mineral rights, I said aloud to no one in particular, may everyone know what they're worth. My phone rang. It was Raymond. "Zach, got a minute? We're looking at drilling 3 more wells on the pad. The geology keeps getting better the more we drill. Are you in?" I smiled. "Yeah, Raymond, I'm in." The Permian Basin had been producing oil for over 100 years and would likely continue for 100 more. And thanks to an overreaching HOA president who tried to steal what wasn't hers, I was now part of that legacy. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's success, earned honestly and enjoyed thoroughly. Patricia had wanted to profit from my mineral rights. Instead, I'd struck oil the next month after her lawsuit and kept every single drop, every dollar, every victory. The well was still producing, the sun was still setting, and life in Pine Ridge was finally peaceful. I'd fought the HOA and won. More importantly, I'd drilled through 7,000 feet of Texas earth and found liquid gold. As I sat there finishing my beer, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. From that first confrontation with Patricia on my driveway to watching crude oil flow from my wells, it had been a wild ride. The legal battles had been stressful, expensive, and at times infuriating, but they'd also been educational. I'd learned that property rights in America, especially in Texas, are sacred. The law protects landowners and mineral rights owners, but only if you're willing to stand up and fight. If I'd rolled over when Patricia first threatened me, if I'd signed away my rights just to avoid conflict, I'd have lost everything. I'd also learned that HOAs, while sometimes necessary for maintaining community standards, can become tyrannical when led by the wrong people. Patricia had used her position to bully and defraud the very homeowners she was supposed to serve. The system had eventually corrected itself. She'd been removed, prosecuted, and punished, but not before causing a lot of harm. The experience had changed my perspective on retirement, too. I'd thought I was done with the oil business, ready to spend my days playing golf and traveling. Instead, I'd gotten pulled back in and discovered I still had the skills and instincts that had made me successful in my career. Sometimes, the best years aren't the ones you plan for, but the ones that emerge from unexpected circumstances. My civil lawsuit against Patricia for abusive process and the fraudulent HOA action had settled in April. Her insurance company, not wanting to risk a trial, paid me $150,000. It covered my legal fees and then some. I donated the excess to a legal aid fund that helps homeowners fight unfair HOA actions in Texas. The Apex Energy situation had resolved itself too. Once Dale Kruger was indicted, the company had distanced itself from him completely. They issued a public statement saying Kruger had been acting outside his authority, and that Apex didn't condone any illegal activities. Whether that was true or just corporate damage control, I didn't know. But Apex had pulled out of the Pine Ridge area entirely, ceding the field to Crescent Resources and a few other operators. Speaking of Crescent Resources, my partnership with them had evolved beyond just the initial wells. Raymond's bosses had been so impressed with the production results that they'd asked me to consult on other projects in the Permian Basin. I wasn't interested in working full-time, but I agreed to provide geological and engineering advice on a contract basis. It gave me something productive to do and kept me engaged with the industry I loved. The 3 wells currently producing on my pad were generating impressive numbers. Production had declined from the initial peak as expected, but they were still flowing around 1,200 barrels per day combined. My net revenue had settled into a steady rhythm of about $10,000 to $15,000 per day, depending on oil prices and operating costs. Crescent had also succeeded in negotiating mineral rights leases with several of my neighbors, which allowed them to extend the horizontal wells even further. The homeowners were getting royalty payments, and Crescent was getting better well economics. It was a win-win situation, exactly how the oil business is supposed to work when everyone acts honestly. Life in Pine Ridge had returned to normal, or at least a new version of normal. The subdivision had a new HOA board that focused on actual community issues like maintaining the pool, organizing neighborhood events, and handling legitimate covenant violations. No one tried to claim they owned mineral rights they didn't have. Tom Randall and I became good friends. He felt guilty about not stopping Patricia sooner, even though there was nothing he realistically could have done. I assured him that by coming forward with the evidence, he'd done the right thing when it mattered most. We started having regular dinners, trading stories about teaching and petroleum engineering, 2 very different careers with surprisingly similar challenges. I also reconnected with Frank Sullivan, the man who'd sold me the house and conveyed the mineral rights. He was retired and living in New Mexico, but when he heard about everything that had happened, he called to congratulate me. I knew those mineral rights might be valuable someday, Frank said. That's why I insisted on selling them with the house rather than keeping them separate. I'm glad they went to someone who understood what they were worth and had the guts to defend them. Did you ever think about drilling yourself? I asked. Crossed my mind, but I didn't have the expertise or the capital. I figured if someone wanted to drill, they'd approach me about a lease. When no one did, I just forgot about it. Then I decided to move to New Mexico to be closer to my grandkids, so I sold the whole package. Best decision I ever made. Those grandkids are the light of my life. I'm grateful you structured the sale the way you did. If you'd retained the mineral rights, none of this would have happened. Frank laughed. Well, you earned it. Not many people would have fought back the way you did. Most would have caved to the HOA pressure. That conversation stayed with me. Frank was right that many people would have given in. The American legal system is designed to protect rights, but it's also expensive and intimidating. Patricia had counted on me being too scared or too cheap to fight. She'd miscalculated. By late summer, the criminal cases were fully resolved. Patricia was serving her sentence at a women's correctional facility near Gatesville. I didn't take any pleasure in her incarceration, but I did feel a sense of justice. She deliberately tried to defraud me and dozens of other homeowners. The consequences were appropriate. Dale Kruger's conviction had been satisfying too. The trial revealed that he'd been running similar schemes in multiple Texas counties, targeting HOAs and convincing them they had authority over mineral rights. Prosecutors estimated he'd attempted to fraudulently acquire millions of dollars worth of mineral rights over several years. My case had been the one that finally brought him down. The civil lawsuit against Apex Energy had been settled with the provision that the company implement compliance training for all their landmen and consultants. Apex also had to establish a verification process to ensure mineral rights were legitimately owned before attempting to lease them. It wouldn't undo the past, but it might prevent future problems. As fall arrived in West Texas, bringing slightly cooler temperatures and the occasional dust storm, I found myself reflecting on the entire experience with a sense of satisfaction. The legal battle had been exhausting, but winning felt good. The oil production was lucrative, but more than that, it was validation of my decades in the industry. I'd also learned something about community. Pine Ridge had been nearly torn apart by Patricia's scheming, but in the aftermath, people had come together. Neighbors who'd barely spoken before were now friends. The HOA board meetings, once dominated by Patricia's imperious declarations, were now collaborative and transparent. People understood that their HOA should serve them, not rule them. In November, the subdivision held a community Thanksgiving dinner at the clubhouse. It was a new tradition suggested by the reformed HOA board as a way to build neighborhood relationships. I attended and was surprised by how many people wanted to talk to me, not about oil or lawsuits, but about normal things like football, travel plans, and holiday recipes. One woman, Sandra Mitchell, pulled me aside during the dinner. "I need to apologize to you," she said. "When all this started, I believed Patricia. I thought you were being difficult and selfish. I even signed one of her documents claiming the HOA owned my mineral rights. It wasn't until later that I understood what was really happening. I'm sorry for not supporting you." "It's okay, Sandra." Patricia was convincing, and she had the authority of the HOA behind her. People trusted her as they should have been able to. She betrayed that trust, not you. Still, I should have asked more questions. If more of us had been skeptical, maybe we could have stopped her sooner. "Maybe, but it all worked out in the end," Sandra smiled. "I heard you donated money to help homeowners fight unfair HOA actions. That's really generous, especially after what you went through." "Just trying to make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to others. Knowledge is power, and property rights are worth protecting." December brought the best news yet. Crescent Resources confirmed they'd be drilling 3 more wells in the spring, and they'd also acquired leases for an adjacent section. The Wolfcamp Shale formation was proving even more productive than initial estimates. Raymond projected that within 2 years, there could be 12 wells producing from the greater Pine Ridge area. "You've got prime acreage, Zach," Raymond told me over lunch in Midland. "That working interest you negotiated is going to be worth millions over the life of the field. You might be the richest person in your HOA. I laughed. That's not a high bar in a middle-class subdivision. But yeah, I've done okay. More than okay. You've basically won the lottery, except with geological knowledge instead of random chance. I prefer to think of it as 30 years of hard work paying off in an unexpected way." "Fair enough. So what are you going to do with all this money?" It was a good question. I'd been thinking about it a lot. Invest some, give some away, and enjoy the rest. I'm not interested in a mansion or a yacht. I like my life pretty much the way it is, but it's nice to have security and options. You could retire again, for real this time. I'm not sure I want to. Consulting for you guys is fun. It keeps my mind sharp." Raymond raised his glass of iced tea. "Well, here's to unexpected second acts and striking oil in your backyard." I clinked my glass against his. "And to HOA, presidents who don't know when to quit." As 2026 drew to a close, I took stock of an extraordinary year. I'd been threatened, sued, and harassed by my HOA. I'd spent enormous amounts of time and money defending my property rights. I'd taken a huge financial risk by drilling for oil, and I'd come out on top in every single way. The wells were producing steadily, generating income that exceeded my wildest expectations. The legal battles were over, with complete vindication. The criminals were in prison. The neighborhood was healthier than before. On New Year's Eve, I stood on my back porch, like I had so many evenings before, watching the lights of drilling rigs dotting the horizon. West Texas was booming again, as it had so many times in the past century. Somewhere out there, roughnecks were working through the holiday, drilling deeper, chasing the oil that had made this region famous. And somewhere beneath my feet, 7,000 feet down in the Wolfcamp Shale, oil was flowing through fractures and into wellbores, making its way to the surface, into pipelines, into refineries, and ultimately into the gas tanks and products that powered modern life. Patricia had tried to take that from me. She'd seen dollar signs and decided that property rights were negotiable, that she could bully and deceive her way to wealth. Instead, she'd awakened something in me, a determination to fight for what was mine and to prove that the rule of law still mattered. I'd struck oil the month after her lawsuit, not through luck, but through decades of expertise, strategic thinking, and willingness to take calculated risks. And I'd kept every drop, every dollar, every ounce of satisfaction. As midnight approached and fireworks began to pop in the distance, I raised a final toast to the year that had changed everything. To mineral rights, to justice, and to never backing down from a fight you know you can win. The new year stretched ahead, full of possibility. More wells to drill, more oil to produce, more quiet evenings on this porch watching the Texas sunset. Patricia Whitmore had tried to take my mineral rights. Instead, she'd given me the motivation to become the most successful independent oil producer in Pine Ridge. Sometimes the best revenge is just living well and drilling deep.